I want to start by introducing our first panelist. I'm pleased to introduce Professor Diane-Laure Arjalies. Diane-Laure is an associate professor in the Sustainability, Managerial Accounting and Control and General Management groups at Ivey. As Ivey Sustainable Finance Lab lead, she is pushing boundaries of knowledge and practice by investigating how fashioning new devices and collective action can help transform financial markets towards sustainability. She is currently leading an extensive research program on conservation finance, aiming to channel capital towards protecting ecosystems, notably through conservation impact bonds. Thank you, Diane-Laure, for sharing your invaluable insights and expertise in the area.
Thank you, Gail. Bonjour à tous, merci d'être ici. So as Gail was saying, I'm a faculty member leading the Sustainable Finance Lab. I've been working with Andre, was in the panelist here on the coding and conservation impact bonds and other financial projects. So my task here in the next 5 minutes is to give you an overview of what we talk about in terms of biodiversity. So here you have 4 themes when it comes to challenges and opportunities when it comes to the biodiversity loss crisis and the climate crisis. So often we speak about the climate crisis, but the biodiversity loss crisis is also a crisis that, of course, is linked to the climate crisis. So we are in the 5th mass extinction of species. So between 1917 and 2016, we estimate that we lost 68% of the mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fish on Earth, and more than 85% of wetlands were lost. It's really important to understand that when species disappear and biodiversity is lost, it's really difficult to go back to the previous state, you know, and we lost genetic diversity, we lost some climate resiliency. So it's really a difficult crisis to address, and the sooner we act, the better it is. To act, we have a huge finance gap. So we're thinking the latest estimates is a 4.1 trillion financing gap by 2050, which has an estimate of between 60 and 80 billion per year. It's a huge financial need, okay? And right now, this finance gap is not being addressed. When people think about the climate crisis, often they want to address and reduce harms, carbon sequestration, but there are really few action about regeneration and what we call the bioeconomy, which is basically trying to found and support the regenerative features of the land, which is life, you know, and bring back biodiversity on the planet, on Earth. But we had some commitment, and I'm going to go back to those commitments after. So now most of the countries, coalition of 188 countries, governments, they want to protect 30% of lands and waters by 2030. So that's as well the 30 by 30. When you hear that, this is this commitment, and it was decided and officially at COP15 in Montreal last December, and I'm going to go back to that. So there are challenges, there are needs, but there's also some opportunities. So we estimate that the value of biodiversity is 33 trillion a year. So it's a combined GDP of the US and China, and 55% of global GDP depends on ecosystems. That's the current financial flows. As you can see on the left, there's a graph. It goes about the biodiversity conservation. Those are the flows for biodiversity conservation. And it's interesting in this slide because you have the subsidies, but the harmful subsidies and in red, and then you have the green funding that below. So first, I want you to notice that agricultural, forestry, fishery subsidies, it doesn't mean that biodiversity is being funded, because if you do industrial agricultural practices, you can lead to land degradation. So it's not because you do agriculture or you do forestry that you necessarily support biodiversity or your bioeconomy. To do that, you really need to support agriculture and forestry in a bioregenerative way. So what you could see at the very bottom, there's $1, which is basically 1% of the finance devoted to finance the fighting the climate crisis. It's channeled towards restoring ecosystems. And this is really unfortunate because when you look at research, like for instance, Nature, which is quite a well-known scientific journal, we know that nature-based climate solutions are one of the most effective and cheapest climate action approaches. So we have a misfit between where the money goes, where the economy goes, and what we need to be climate resilient and what makes sense, both financially and ecologically. I just want to see here on the graph, there's there's no subsidies for the fossil fuel productions, but it's not even included, but you have the number at the bottom. So just for you on sec. So now I'm gonna go to the next slides about the COP15. So you understood that we are facing a huge climate crisis, a biodiversity loss crisis. I think now governments are starting to understand what's going to happen next and what we have to fight. We see there's opportunities, challenges, and a mismatch between the financial flows and the economic flows and what we need. So now we have in COP15, it happened in Canada. So it was a Chinese conference that was hosted by Canada in Montreal. That's why it's called Cumin Montreal. Because of COVID, it was postponed. So this is a really interesting COP. So you know the COP for climate, this is the COP for biodiversity. And so we have an historic packages to address the loss of biodiversity and restoring natural ecosystems. So basically we have 95% of the parties to the UN CBD, which is the biodiversity, I was 2 non-parties, so they sign it. So on the next slide, you'll see what the main measures are. So what is interesting, that's really the finance and biodiversity there. So here we're in a business school, we're looking at the economics aspect of it. So for the first time at the COP, there was one day dedicated to finance and biodiversity. And what they committed was that, and this is the general press release, that subsidies, the subsidies you saw 2 slides ago, that are harmful should decrease. So it's interesting because it's not only you have to support bioeconomy, but you also have to shift the economies and how the financial flows are going to shift the way we do business. So that's quite interesting. Then the second one, of course, that they want to have more financing from both domestic and international biodiversity from all sources, both public and private, and they really insisted on the blended finance and the role of the corporations there, because governments won't have enough money and cannot act alone. And so that was interesting as well, is that you have a specific commitment about the role of companies and financial institutions to report on what they do. So the key message of COP15 was like, we need businesses to be together to work on this.